What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Saturdays and Stores podcast, brought to you as always on the Crossover Media Network. My name is Kanaye, and well, it's over. Um, Obviously, UConn season's over. They lost 77-75, and really, an unexpected down to the wire game. Um, it really, it really did end in heartbreaking fashion. Unfortunately, it really is. It really was sad to see kind of just how it transpired down the stretch in a game that a lot of people, including myself, like I talked about in last week's episode, I just didn't expect it to go that way. I did not think UConn was going to play Florida that close at all, and I got to give a lot of credit to the work that Hurley and his staff did and the players for keeping as close as for as long as they did. So, I'm going to break down the game a little bit, not too much X's and O's wise, just because obviously the season's over and there's nothing really, there's no merit that really comes to speaking in what UConn needs to improve X's and O's wise, especially with which kind of leads into the next point I'm going to get into in this episode about obviously who you bring back and who you go after in the portal going into next year. But before we get into all that, if you like this podcast, if you like any of the other content you see on this channel, please subscribe, like the videos, tell other people about it. It really does help with YouTube's algorithm and being able to get this content out to more people. So let's talk about it. UConn lost 77-75 in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the second round against Florida. I know it was the title of the last video, but I did forget to mention, talk a little bit about how UConn obviously tied that Leitner, Bobby Hurley, Grant Hill team for the second most consecutive wins in the NCAA tournament with 13. So definitely a huge accomplishment. That just goes to show you how successful this program has been over the course of the last two seasons. And, I guess this season too, they got the first round win, which was really important. That would have been a bad way to go if you lost that Oklahoma team. But yeah, going into this game, like I talked about, I did not think UConn was going to have any chance of winning this game if Lee McNeely and Alex Karaban didn't have a good game. And for being honest, neither of those guys really did have a great game, and UConn still stuck with it. And they made this game really, really competitive. They went into the break tied, and to speak a little bit about the first half, I think that was arguably one of the best jobs Dan Hurley's done game plan wise as a coach in this 2-3 year run, whatever you want to call it. Just because, you consider every game over the last two seasons prior to this one, they won every game in the tournament by double digits. I think 13 points was the lowest margin of victory that they had. And if we're being honest, they were probably the favorite going to almost every game outside of maybe that Gonzaga game 2 years back in the Elite Eight. So definitely, I think a lot of credit goes out to Luke Murray, Kamani Young, Tom Moore, Hurley, of course, just with the game plan they put together for this Florida team in this matchup. They were really able to neutralize Walter Clay in the first half. Alex Condon was not a factor at all throughout this entire game. And really the guy who kind of kept Florida in it was Elijah Martin. He made some really tough shots in the first half. Was able to get into the lane, get into the paint. But yeah, if UConn's able to knock down their shots in the first half, I know Solo Ball, Alex Karaban both have had a few open looks, a few looks where normally they probably are able to get that to go, and those couldn't fall. And if they do hit those shots, there's a good chance they go up 10 maybe heading into halftime. So it's unfortunate that the shots didn't fall. It would have put UConn in a much, much better position to win this game. But yeah, the second half, they kind of came out hot. They really put Florida in a really tough spot, put their backs against the wall, honestly. I believe UConn went up 7 at one point. And from that point, I really did feel comfortable. I felt UConn, just with how they played, was going to be able to find a way to will themselves to a victory against this Florida team. But then there was a stretch of, I want to say 5 to maybe 4.5, 5 minutes of game time where UConn did not have a single field goal. All their points came at the line, and they just couldn't get anything offensively. The guys weren't hitting shots, and McNeely, he kind of forced a lot. It's very similar to what we saw in the Oklahoma game, where he really was just he needed to let the game come to him. He was forcing a lot of shots, like I just said, and yeah, they weren't falling. He did, of course, have that really hot stretch at the end of the game when UConn was pretty much out of reach of being able to get this victory. I know he did bang the three as the buzzer expired, which of course cashed a few bets, I think, for UConn spread, which, by the way, over the last 3 years, UConn has covered the spread in every single tournament game. So we either like UConn or not, they are America's team in being able to cash the spread bets. So that's definitely cool to see. But yeah, a total score bet too. I believe I saw Bleacher Report betting posted. But yeah, again, they just struggled so much offensively, and I think a lot of this roster's weaknesses kind of came back to light, where a lot of these guys, a lot of the ways in which they score comes off of what they get out of UConn sets and the actions that they run. And I just think they don't have any shot creation. And when Lee McNeely isn't playing good, like he did in kind of the Big East tournament against Creighton and in these first two games of the tournament, they really don't have much going for them offensively when their sets aren't working. Whatever. I mean, because they were getting to their spots and they were getting good looks in the first half, but Florida did a really good job running guys off of screens. I know there was a few plays where Alex had a slip coming off a screen, and it would have been a great cut, and Hassan, threw a turnover there. It was a tough pass. It would have been a tough pass to make. So you can't fault Haas too much there. But yeah, I think another moment that was really stood out to me as a kind of just a brutal blow was when they were coming down on the break and AK had the ball. He had it. He probably could have finished if he just went up strong on the left side, but he kind of forced an up and under layup to finish on the right side. I felt he should have just went up on the left, could have finger rolled it in maybe, but he made it to a point where he kind of put it in the hands of the officials. I thought, yeah, it was probably a foul, but again, you go up on the left side strong, you probably do get fouled there too, and who knows, you maybe finish that and get an and one and put UConn in a much better position than what ended up happening after AK blew that layup. But yeah, I think the rebounding too also killed UConn this game. Florida got on the offensive glass a lot in the second half, especially at the free throw line after their free throw shots. And there were just some really, really tough NBA level. I mean, like Dan Hurley talked about in his post game presser after the game, just NBA level threes that Walter Clayton made. I mean, he probably had 3 or 4 just back breaking dagger threes that he hit in the second half. Again, just tough fadeaways. There was one in the corner he hit. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that's a first team All American. I'm sure he had a lot of vengeance on his mind, considering that he was on the Iona team, played under Rick Pitino 2 years back in 2023 when UConn beat them in the second round. So I'm sure, or the first round, my mistake. So I'm sure that was very somewhat fresh on his mind, and he definitely wanted to come out and have a good performance against UConn, and he did. I mean, that's again first team All American. He's definitely up in the running for the Bob Cousy, and yeah, really really good player. Florida, I don't think I gave him the credit that they deserved going into this game. I know I talked about how I felt they were maybe the weakest one seed, and UConn got really lucky with that draw. But of course, you draw one seed, and it's tough to beat. I talked about it. I don't think UConn was good enough to beat a one seed, and the fact that they made it this close really, really did impress me. Um, just get all things considered, but Florida is probably the hottest team in the country before this game. I'm sure their metrics on KenPom probably go down a little bit just without UConn was able to kind of neutralize them offensively at times, and their defense wasn't great either. Speaking in terms of Florida, but yeah, I mean, Florida is definitely a team that now that they got, I talked about it on me and Josh's episode we did for the crossover U on our first weekend recap that I think every national champion at some point has to take a punch, and they probably win a game that they shouldn't. This was a game that Florida probably shouldn't have won, but they were able to will themselves. They have tough shot makers like Elijah Martin, like Walter Clayton Jr. And yeah, and there are other guys that didn't play well either. And when they're playing well, Florida's going to be really, really tough to beat. And they're definitely a major, major threat to make a Final Four national championship, especially with St. John's losing in this West region too. So yeah, but I mean, um, I think that it's tough because initially watching the game, when you have the chance to win it, of course you're disappointed when you can't. But I think at first I was definitely really, really proud of how this team fought and played in a game that I really gave them no chance in winning in. I think a lot of people as well. And they kept it so close. There were points where they really looked like they were going to be able to pull this one out and win, but they just couldn't get together in late stretches of the game. And it's unfortunate because, I talk about initially, I was very pleased with this outcome, but then it kind of makes you think if they played with the intensity and the defensive energy that they played with in this game, If they do that throughout the whole season, like in Maui, like at the loss at Seton Hall, then maybe at Finneran Pavilion against Nova where AK missing 2 free throws, then UConn's in a lot better of a position this season overall. And it's just again, you avoid that Seton Hall loss, you avoid the Colorado loss, the Dayton loss, losses that really, really drag down your resume. Pick up a few more wins in Big East play, like again, maybe that Finneran Pavilion loss, the loss at Xavier, the loss at home to St. John's, even at the Garden against St. John's, or in the Big East tournament. UConn puts themselves in a much, much better position seeding wise. Maybe they don't end up on that 8-9 game line and they don't have to draw one seed in the second round, and they can play obviously a lower level of opponent, which would allow them to go further in the tournament than what we saw this year with the second round exit. So just kind of unfortunate to see. I don't know if this is the best comparison to make here, but it in a way kind of reminds me. For those of you who don't know, I am a Miami Heat fan. I don't even want to talk about how bad they've been this year, but just in terms of, kind of reminds me. You think of Jimmy Butler and how, of course, how much he rides, the level he raised his game to in the playoffs. I know there was the one year they were the 1 seed and they made the conference finals, obviously losing to Boston. But I mean, the next year you're an 8 seed. You make it to the finals that year, but you think about how being down and worn out that team was, especially Jimmy Butler after having to play the way he did to get the Heat that far. And I just think for him, he sits out a lot of games in the regular season. At least he did in the later years with Miami. And you think, he plays more or plays with that kind of playoff Jimmy mentality in the regular season. He put themselves in a better position to have a better seed and maybe not have to play some of the tougher teams that they had to in the first round, like against Milwaukee, like against the New York, like against the Knicks that year too. And obviously, again, I don't know if that's the best comparison to make. That's just something that I kind of thought of a little bit. But yeah, it is frustrating to consider that. I don't think this team and how the season played out is telling of how good they actually were. I don't think, again, I think, it is a result of guys maybe not making the leaps that we thought they were going to, or maybe misevaluating talent in the portal, like with an Aiden Mahaney. But it's really unfortunate because I do think this team was a lot better than what they showed this year. And obviously didn't pan out. Second round exit, you hate to see it in a year where all the hype leading up to the season was to go on another Final Four run and potentially win a third straight national championship. And obviously, I think that just goes to show you how hard it is to win in college basketball. Just how hard it is to go back to back. I mean, you forget the 2023 national championship to have to come back and win, go back to back again, winning for a third straight year. It's so tough. And you have to remember what this program has lost over the past 2 years. You lose 2 years ago, you lose Andre Jackson Jr., you lose Jordan Hawkins, Adama Sanogo, Joey Calcaterra, Naheem Aline transfers to St. John's. And then you turn around and then the next year you lose 4 starters in Donovan Clingan, Steph Castle, 2 lottery picks, Cam Spencer, arguably the best shooter in the country last year, Tristan Newton, who was the best point guard in the country last year, the tournament most outstanding player, Bob Cousy Award winner. And I think I've talked about it in the past. I think a lot of people, including myself, kind of bought into this narrative that Hurley's a good enough coach to get over the flaws that this roster had. And a lot of people I pointed out that this roster had going into the year, the lack of size in the backcourt with 3 small guards in Haas, Solo, and Mahaney, Amon Noel too, and really not too much shot creation outside of what we banked on being in Aiden Mahaney, and obviously that didn't really pan out this year. And I just think it is unfortunate because you thought guys were going to be a little bit better. You thought maybe Stewie was going to take a bigger leap, Jay Ross was going to take a bigger leap, and I think Stewie showed flash this year. That's a guy that I really, really want to come back, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. But yeah, it's so hard to win in college basketball, and you have to realize this run was going to come to an end at some point. You're not going to win a national championship every single year. And I think UConn's fans have been really spoiled and really unwilling to accept that. Just considering how successful the program has been in the past 2 years, I think it was really unfair. A lot of the criticism some of the guys got this year, like Aiden, like at AK. I mean, especially AK. It's just you have to remember his archetype as a player isn't set up to be someone who is a go-to guy, a go-to scorer. He's really best when he's a third, fourth option, like we saw last year, like we saw 2 years ago, like we saw this year when Liam McNeely was playing really, really well, and AK was getting natural fours guarding him instead of more athletic threes, and he wasn't up and probably the number one guy on opposing team scouting reports when they came to play UConn. So it's tough. It definitely is tough, but yeah, I also think you have to remember, Haas and Sampson, those guys are probably both best as energy off the bench change of pace guys. That's what Sampson Haas were last year. And, I have to give those two guys so much credit for stepping up the way they did this year. Of course, there were times where it was frustrating watching those guys, but you have to remember, Haas has been battling injuries since the middle of the season. I think since that Creighton game with the tendonitis in his knee or arthritis, I forget what it is. And, not too much was said about that, but that dude's a warrior, man. He plays so tough. And I am really, really going to miss seeing Haas play here at UConn. I mean, that guy he's so good. And I mean, of course, he's not the caliber of player at the point that Tristan Newton was, but you have to give him so much credit for the way he battled all year long. You never heard him complain when he wasn't starting last year. Didn't start the season this year. And when Mahaney didn't work out a point, he stepped up, played that role. And for a moment of time, when they went on that run after Maui, he looked like one of the better point guards in the country. And then I think, the injuries kind of caught up to him, but he still battled. He never complained, never made excuses. He showed up every game when he could, and he fought. I mean, he played. I mean, there were games out there where he was probably at 60%, like at Marquette, and he was moving slower, and he battled. He's a really tough player, and he's definitely a guy that I'm going to miss seeing suit up for UConn. And it's just with him graduating, Sampson too. I forgot to mention last episode. Now the winningest player in the history of the program, 115 wins that Sampson has been a part of since he arrived in STORRS. And I mean, that's a guy too where, yeah, at times he does frustrate you watching him play, but he is the heart and soul of this program. And he just, yeah, great change of pace guy coming off the bench for Klingon last year. This year, I definitely think he stepped up at times, had probably some of the best games of his career here this year, of course, now in that elevated starting role. And yeah, I know I talked about how I felt maybe Terrace should be the starter. I know a lot of people, others have said that, but he never complained either when he was getting that criticism. And he always showed up. That guy's he's a warrior. He battled every single game, never complained about injuries, never complained about the games where maybe Terrace was playing a lot more than him. And, that's also a guy that I'm really, really going to miss. And, people can say what they want. Yeah, he might not be going to the NBA, but let me tell you, he's going to have one of the sickest highlight tapes to look back on, just with all the dunks and blocks that he's had throughout his career here at UConn. And, AK, I don't think anyone should ever have a bad thing to say about Alex Karaban. Hurley's talked about so much how much the program changed once Alex Karaban arrived on campus. And hey, he was, the heart and soul of the last, 3 teams. He again, might not be a star, might not be the guy who can go and score 20 plus on any given night, but he's such one of the smartest players in the sport, and just the glue guy, and the countless dagger threes he's hit in his career. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen the video going around of him crying in the locker room, talking about how he doesn't want to take off the jersey. And hey, who knows, maybe he runs it back for his senior year here at UConn. I don't know if that's going to end up being the case. I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I'm going to if this really it for AK, and going back to those two guys I just mentioned, I'm really going to miss those guys a lot, seeing them play. No matter how good or bad that they played in the season, and I'm just so thankful for everything they've done for this program, and I'm going to miss seeing those guys suit up for UConn every night. But yeah, just to talk a little bit about the off season, I think the number one thing for this program is going to be retention. I don't know if that's necessarily the number one thing, but it's tied, if probably next to portal acquisitions. I've talked about in the past how I think UConn, if you're Dan Hurley and his staff, your number one goal in terms of retaining players, there are 3 guys that I think you need to get back. Those being Solo Ball, Jalen Stewart, and Terrace Reed. I'm pretty confident that Solo Ball does end up returning. I think, he's a fan favorite here. He elevated his game to a new level this year, and I think that guy has so much talent, and just he has a chance to be an All-American next year, I think, an all-league player, potential Big East player of the year. But there are definitely some things he needs to work on, like I mentioned in the past so many times. He's become a better defender. I don't think he has any excuse to not be a better defender than what he showed this season. Um, a guy being that naturally athletic, long wingspan at 7 feet. And I just think he again, I understand he's a little undersized at 6'3" at the two, but again, the longer wingspan I think helps kind of make up for that. He's a really naturally talented athlete. And, I think he really doesn't need to prove defensively, especially off the ball, and not, kind of fall victim to some of the lapses he's shown us this year. And I think offensively, he needs to become more than a 3-point shooter. He needs to attack closeouts a lot more than what he did this year. I think of that game against Oklahoma, it was nice to see him kind of get into the mid-range a little bit. He's shown that at times this year. I want to see him do more of that for sure. I, I think it really revolves around him being a little bit more of an off-ball creator, or off-the-dribble creator, my mistake. Again, just being able to attack closeouts, getting into the paint. Again, he's really, really athletic player. He's a guy who I think can throw down some poster dunks. And I don't think we've seen that out of him yet. So I would very much like to see him work on that going into the summer and going into next season. And again, I really, really can't afford to lose Solo Ball. So I do everything we can to keep him. I would like to say I'm pretty confident he returns. I don't see why he would leave, just considering how much of a fan favorite he is here and just how much he's already grown from this last year, this year, and how much he can continue to grow and improve going into next season. I think the second most important of the two you need to keep is Terrace Reed. I've talked about a lot how I think the staff, when they recruited him out of Michigan in the transfer portal, their vision was to kind of, this year come off the bench for Samson Johnson, but by his senior year, be similar to what we had with Adama Sanogo 2 years back. I think he's honestly outperformed all expectations I had and a lot of people had for him this season. Where he probably should have been the starter at probably at the midpoint of the season. But that's a guy who's I think more naturally gifted and talented than Adama Sanogo ever was. And I think Terrace, a lot of people don't give Terrace the credit he deserves for how good his footwork is already. But I think he needs to become more disciplined in terms of his fouling. And to add to that, of course, he still has the lapses and poor judgment at times when making the wrong read or, costly turnovers at times, not catching the ball. If he can improve on those things and continue to hammer in on that footwork, I know the staff this year had him watch a lot of Sanogo tape. I think if he stays, that's going to continue to happen. But that is a guy who I have heard potential rumors about. He might be in that 50% that Hurley talked about, potentially, looking and hearing what offers could be out there in the portal. On the date of this recording, Tuesday, March 25th, none of the players on the roster have officially put their names into the portal just yet. So I'm definitely going to be, watching to see what goes down with that. But I think, Terrace, I think it could be a money thing. I'm sure you have to, kind of be smart if you're a player. There's a lot of money on the table around the programs across the country. So it could be more of a leverage thing where he sees what his value could be out there and then, comes back to UConn. And UConn might have to overpay for him. And that's the reality of it. I think as long as the asking price is somewhat fair, you got to do it to keep Terrace because that kid could be really, really good next year. And, I think they have a chance to have somewhat of a system at the 5 spot, similar to what we had 2 years ago with Adama Sanogo starting and Donovan Clean coming off the bench. Next year would be Terrace Reed starting and Eric Ryba coming off the bench. The 7-footer, a guy can space the floor a little bit, do a lot offensively. They're definitely someone who I would prioritize keeping a lot in Terrace Reed. So the third guy, Jalen Stewart. Now, I initially didn't think that Stewie would be one of the 50% who is considering portal, but as of late, I have heard that this is a real possibility now. I think I talked about how he kind of came on late in the rotation last year, and I think a lot of hype NBA-wise starts around his name over the summer. I know there were some mocks over the summer which had him going first round. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. I don't think he put out the tape that is good enough to be an NBA player this season. But of course, there are the glimpses: 16 points at half in the first half against Memphis. The game against Villanova, where he defended Eric Dixon really well and showcased his NBA level shot making. He had moments this year, like in the first half against Marquette, where he went 3 for 3. He started off 3 for 3 from outside. First half against St. John's at Gamble, where he played really, really well. I think later in the season, he kind of came on And there were times this year where I think he really kind of embraced being a glue guy, where he got on the ground, dove for balls, was getting offensive rebounds, put back dunks, and I think that was really cool to see. And I think that's a guy, if he comes back, should start, depending on who they bring in the portal. But I think that's someone who I would stay loyal to if you are Hurley and the staff, and I would probably have him start. I think he's going to be really really motivated going into the summer and showing everybody that he is an NBA level player and he is capable of being an all league player in the Big East. I deep down really believe that, and I think if he comes back, he should be in a starting role, and I think he's going to excel a lot. Now being a third year player in UConn system, but again, I've heard that Stewie's dad went on social media, I think like X, and said UConn was great. So the was is definitely a little alarming in terms of being able to retain Stewie. I hope that was just something that won't it's something that doesn't end up happening where Stewie leaves. But again, if he leaves, and this goes for anyone who ends up leaving, I really do wish him the best. Of course, um, you know, I really do hope Stewie does not transfer. I mean, that's a guy again who could be really really good next year. And I have a lot of faith in, and really did wish he got a little bit more playing time this year in the rotation. But yeah, and then outside of that, I think there are a lot of guys who UConn might potentially not even want back. Just in terms of, I think there are a lot of guys on this roster who maybe I don't want to come off as you know negative when I say this, but maybe some of these guys just aren't UConn level players. I think Aiden Mahaney probably wasn't necessarily ready for the Big East coming out of the WCC, and it's tough when you're an undersized two guard and you're forced to play a position you really didn't do at your old school. And of course, you're not the biggest player. Aiden Mahaney's probably was the smallest player on the team this year, just in terms of physical makeup. But yeah, I would assume he's probably one of those players who is in that 50% that is more than likely testing the portal, could already know where they're going to end up. If he comes back, I think he'd probably be in a bench role where he comes off the bench, try to bring a little bit scoring. And if he comes back, I do think he will improve. Now having a full year under Hurley and having a full 2 summers to really learn the system and kind of prepare himself, and he knows what to expect now in Big East play. But yeah, I would probably put my money on him not returning and entering his name into the portal. And then of course you have guys like Abraham, Noel, Jay Ross, Sangare. I would probably bank on a lot of those guys putting their names in the portal too. Ahmad Noel, who's a top 40, top 30 player, I can't fully remember. And yeah, he didn't see much action this year playing. And in the moments he did, I think it was a little unfair being thrown into the fire against St. John's in that game at MSG. And yeah, I think he probably deserved to play a little bit more this year. And I'm not sure why he didn't, but I'm not going to speculate too much on that. But yeah, I'm sure he's a little frustrated, didn't play at all this year. Being a highly rated 4-star, again, top 40, top 30 type player. And then Abraham, guy who really didn't see any minutes at all outside of garbage time. Sangare, same kind of deal outside of that Texas game and the game at the Garden against Gonzaga. But yeah, in terms of retention, I wouldn't lose too much sleep losing anyone outside of those three guys I mentioned that you really got to try to keep. But if I were to pick one or two, I would probably say if Noel comes back, that'll be solid. If he could hope that he becomes something like what Haas was for us last year, where he comes off the bench for the starting point and can provide energy minutes, change of pace point. And I think that, I think he can grow into that role. Jay Ross, just because, deep down, I do think that athleticism and natural talent is there. I know he is a practice demon and just has been able to put that onto the actual game day floor. But I think that is a guy who can continue to improve and be better. But yeah, outside of that, I also think retaining coaches is really, really important. I mean, Hurley's talked about it. I'm fully on board with him. He has the best staff in the country between Luke Murray, Tom Moore, Kamani Young. And I'm sure a lot of schools with how many coaching vacancies have opened up, like at Villanova, like at Xavier now with Sean Miller leaving the Big East to go to Texas, the team they beat in the play-in. And yeah, I think it's really, really crucial to keep those guys. I think they're so important to what UConn does offensively and just their scheming. I mean, especially Luke Murray and how he's stuck with Hurley for, really throughout his career. That's a guy who Hurley trusts so much, and as UConn fans trust too, the players trust, and he's done so much. Kamani Young has been great recruiting, and he does a lot in bringing energy to the program and helping out with scheming, both offensively and defensively. And I think losing either of those two coaches is going to be a brutal blow to the program. And I think a lot of those two guys probably are making low tier head coach money that UConn's has to they've bit the bullet and decided, hey, it's worth paying these guys this much money as assistant coaches to keep around just because of how valuable and important they have been to the success of this program, how important and valuable they will be if they stick around for the future of where UConn and the program decides to where they go in the future. But outside of that, just to talk about the portal again, I've talked a lot about how I think the number one goal UConn has to tackle in the portal this offseason is getting a star point guard. They should have the NIL funding and allocation to be able to go and seek out one of, if not the best point guard in the portal this offseason. It's tough to really point out guys who could fit the role because there's a few qualifications I think you need to be able to play at UConn. One, you need to be a Dan Hurley guy. You need to fit the culture. You need to fit the winning over everything, the toughness. You have to understand that Hurley's going to be tough on you, and the coach's effort is going to be tough on you, and you have to understand you're going to be playing in the Big East. It's one of, if not the most physical conferences to play in college basketball, and it's an animal. I mean, we saw it this year. The Big East is no joke. Even in a down year, the Big East is no joke, and they got to be ready for that. And I think they need to be a larger guard, ideally, like we've had in the past few years before this year, with going back 2 years. Jordan Hawkins, slight frame, but he's 6'5", 6'6". Tristan Newton, of course. I mean, he's a guy who is 6'5", of course, again, kind of a slight frame, but he's a large, tall guard who plays physical. I mean, I think what made UConn struggle so much this year is how they have to run their sets from so far out. UConn's offense isn't designed to be ran from 35, 30 feet out. It's designed to be ran from like right behind the 3-point line, if not 1, maybe 2 feet behind the line. And that's what Tristan Newton did. Yeah, Tristan Newton, you inbound the ball to him, he brings it up the court. He's getting to his spot. He's going to back you down and get right behind the 3-point line and make UConn's offense run as crisply as it did while he was the point here for the 2 years he was here. So yeah, and I think ideally you go for a guy who again fits the culture, fits the mold that UConn searches for in players, and someone who is kind of around that 6'4", 6'5" height, maybe 6'6", and that's tough to find because a lot of the portals. I mean, a lot of the players I've seen enter the portal so far, it's tough to really point out guys who could fit both those two qualifications already. And I think if you do end up going for a guy who maybe doesn't fit that frame of being a 6'4", 6'5" point, then you really need to get someone who is an established star, like a Donovan Dent, who just entered the portal today, and someone who, yeah, if we don't end up getting someone who is the size of like a Tristan Newton or a Cam Spencer, then yeah, I would, if that's your best option, then I would go all in on getting Donovan Dent. Only player in the country this year to average 20 plus points per game, 5+ assists. And I think he does a pretty good job in being able to attack, get into the paint, slash. And he's a capable shooter from outside, shot around 40%. So that's, someone who I would definitely value a lot in the portal. Just considering I wasn't very sure about him and how I felt in terms of UConn potentially going after him in the portal until I saw him play in the tournament where he played Marquette, which is obviously one of our rivals in the Big East. And he played really, really well, scored 18 against them. Not as good of a game against Michigan State, but he definitely competed. And I think the caliber of players and roster, which will be around him next year, will be a lot better than what he had at New Mexico this year. So, it could be one guy that I throw out there. And then I think outside of the point, you got to get a 4-man. I'm assuming AK probably keeps his name in the draft this year. I'm not ruling out the possibility of him coming back, but I think he more than likely knows that coming back probably won't benefit him at all in terms of his NBA stock. Which does leave the door open. Maybe he sees that, says, hey, maybe playing one more year of college won't hurt me. And considering that my stock probably isn't getting any better, but I also don't think it's getting any worse. And I really don't think it can get much worse than where it is right now, where it's probably going to be an early to mid second round pick. And He's a guy whose ceiling is fairly high, but he's not gonna be a star. But he's definitely gonna be able to step onto an NBA roster. I think a competing NBA roster, and help in some ways right away. But yeah, I think if you lose AK, you need to get a four man who's physical, can stretch the floor, and obviously play defense to the level of Dan Hurley's defense at UConn. And there are some names I have seen thrown out there. I forget the name, but there is a kid at Florida State who I know UConn recruited heavily out of high school. He's 6'10", shoots around 40% from three, averaged around 10 this year at Florida State. Obviously, Florida State fired their head coach, so he entered the portal. That is a guy that I think could help right away. He's an athletic wing, obviously playing at the four at 6'10", and I think he's someone who I would like to see get in. Obviously, I just think 3-and-D is so valuable to what this program does year in and year out, and I think that would be a great get. Mackenzie Mbako is another name that I've heard that UConn could go after heavily. Of course, he just transferred from he just entered the portal out of Indiana with Mike Woodson leaving and Darren DeVries taking over there. You have really high upside. I think there is there. He's around 6'9", plays physical, tough defense. Shoots it around 35% from three, I believe, which isn't terrible from a four-man. So yeah, those are definitely two guys I would like to see. I just think they need to bring tough and defense, and they need to bring physicality, and they need to be able to step out and hit shots, and bring a little bit of a dimension offensively. But yeah, outside of that, you have the third best rated freshman incoming class in the country. I think a lot of people give this freshman class a lot more hype than could be what it's worth. I just don't know that I see any of those three guys outside of maybe Ryba really playing that much of a role and having that much of an impact as early as their freshman year at UConn. I don't think any of those three guys are going to start. There was a point where I thought maybe Ryba starts, but I just don't think that's going to happen right away. I think Braylon Mullins has a chance to be the best out of the three, just considering that he is the best. He is rated the best shooter in the class. But yeah, you have to look at it just sort of in terms of their physical makeup. Darius Adams and Braylon Mullins, both really, really slight frames. Darius Adams, I think he's 6'5", 6'6", and only 160, so he definitely needs to get in the weight room. Braylon Mullins as well. And yeah, they're going to be playing in the Big East. Like I just mentioned, I don't think I need to talk too much more about how the Big East is such a physical conference and how much of a monster it is once UConn gets into conference play. And, I just hope that they're ready for it. And I'm sure having a summer under Hurley and the staff and being able to get in the weight room and practice with all the guys who are going to be returning, whatever guys they bring into the portal, is definitely going to help them and hopefully prepare them for the season. But, I don't think that we're going to see those guys be superstars right away the way that I think a lot of UConn fans, a lot of people across the country think they will be. Now, I do think they will have to play somewhat of a role in being able to come off the bench and provide some output offensively, just with shot making, specifically Adams and Mullins. I think Jacob Furphy, I forget to mention about him. I think he's more of a project player. He's coming from overseas in Australia. I do think he has a chance to be really good in a few years, but I think he's more of a project player. Could be the Isaiah Abraham type player that we saw this year. Of course, Abraham, we don't know if he's going to return, but yeah, I mean, I think ideally you would like to see Adams and Mullins be somewhat of a toned down version of what we saw last year at Kentucky with Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard. Now, by no means do I think those two guys are going to be anywhere near as good as Reed and Dillingham, but you think what Cal did, he had arguably his two best players, two freshmen, come off the bench, and they did really well doing that. And obviously, I don't think those two guys are going to be anywhere near the two best players on the team next year, but they could come in and, of course, Mullins, being as good of a shooter as he is, come and knock down some threes. Adams can do a lot off the dribble, which I'm really excited to see what he can do in terms of that. I think if they can do that, and then that's going to be really, really good. And again, I think in the portal, you maybe look for one more guy to just fill a role off the bench. Whether if Ahmad Noel leaves, maybe look for a backup point or some more depth at the 4 or 5 spot. Just considering you don't know what's going to end up happening with Sangare and Noel. So yeah, I mean, in terms of that, I think that pretty much takes care of everything I have for this episode today. I'm not sure when this episode is going to go up. It could be today on the day of this recording. It could be, midway through the week. It could just end up going on Saturday as normal. But yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about that. Going forward with the season being over, it's not going to be videos every Saturday anymore. Just there's not going to be really too much to talk about. I know this transfer portal is going to definitely be a talking point. So when guys do end up putting their names in the portals, inevitably from UConn, I will talk about that, make episodes for that. But and then yeah, if whoever UConn is able to acquire and land in the transfer portal, I will make videos on that as well. Those are two things that I'm really excited to see. I'm not excited to see players leave, but I am excited to see who UConn is able to land in the transfer portal cycle this year. But yeah, again, I think that pretty much takes care of everything. I just want to say I really thank everyone who has been watching in this first season of the Saturdays and Stores podcast. I know it's not a lot of you right now, but you got to start somewhere. And for those who have been, watching and sticking around and keeping up with this podcast, I really do appreciate it. And, I really do appreciate the crew we have over here at the Crossover channel. I'm the one UConn guy on a channel that's primarily ran by Purdue students. And, they didn't have to be as welcoming as they were, of course, knowing what went down in the Natty. Sorry to mention it, guys. But yeah, I mean, it's been really fun doing this podcast. And I can't believe that the season's already over. It feels like just yesterday I was making my first episode previewing UConn season. And it's really is incredible how far that how fast the season's went. And I'm really excited to see what this program is going to be able to do over the summer and going into next season. And yeah, Stairway to Seven, it's still open. The window is still open in my eyes. We have the best coach in the country, best staff in the country, and we're gonna have hopefully some big players coming back. Solo, Terrace, Stewie, hopefully, and yeah, land some big names in the portal, and let's go chase another natty. But yeah, until the next episode, I will see you all next time.